You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. Chicago White Sox social media, right after the Super Bowl, if I'm not mistaken, put out a post, like a big picture, like a collage of players, Ed, celebrating the fact that baseball was now back. We got pitchers and catchers reporting. Scott Merkin from MLB.com going to be on this episode. We're going to get in depth with him as we get ready to kick off the preseason, if you will, the spring training, the point in time where we're going to find out exactly what we got. Everybody's going to be in the best shape of their life. It's going to be exciting as we try to figure out whether or not this team can win enough games to not lose 100 of them. And where's the hope at, and what are we going to do, and will anybody else be added? But the White Sox put out this collage of White Sox players celebrating the return of White Sox baseball. And I found the players in the collage to be telling. Because you know this, and I know this, and I think anybody else that's ever worked in media knows this. The PR department went to the general manager, Chris Getz, and said, who's going to be on this team opening day? Who are we sure is a member of this team?
Yeah, are there any guarantees here?
Right, yeah, because you don't want to put a guy in your marketing that isn't going to make it through spring training, or isn't going to be a big part of the team, or isn't going to be somebody that people are going to be excited to see, right? So I found, first of all, really interesting, there was only one pitcher, and it was Michael Kopech.
Which, I thought that was interesting as well. Of all the pitchers, you picked Kopech to be on there.
No, it made sense to me because you don't know what's going to happen with Dylan Cease. He could be traded tomorrow. Like, all of a sudden, the Orioles could get their act together. All of a sudden, somebody else could say, that's it. The Yankees could finally give up one of those outfielders. Like, something could happen, so you don't want to put him.
No, well, okay, yeah, but Kopech as a poster boy for the White Sox pitching staff is just an interesting one. I guess he's probably the only one they have in uniform.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. He's the only guy that they have in a White Sox uniform that they're sure is going to make the 26-man roster. And he's got an opportunity to be a starter, although if you pay close attention, Chris Getz has told us that 8 different guys are going to be starters this year. And there's only going to be 5. He just keeps saying like names, like, yeah, can Garrett Crochet be a starter? Of course we think he could be a starter. What's he going to say? He's not going to be a starter? Like, I mean, like, this is like, get into spring training and prove it. Like, when you're a new boss, Ed, when you're a new boss, you walk into a place, you got people that have been there longer than you got employees that may have been overlooked, you got people that believe they have been put in one spot when they think they're capable of doing something else. If you're a new boss, you tell everybody, I believe in you, show me what you got. That's what you do, right? And all Chris Getz is doing is saying, Garrett Crochet, show me what you got. Doesn't mean he's going to be in the rotation. Doesn't mean Michael Kopech's going to be in the rotation. He talked about how Michael Kopech looked good in the bullpen, and it's like, but, he's doing some good things. Let's see what he's got. That's what you're supposed to do if you're really evaluating talent. The reason why Kopech makes sense is if he doesn't make the rotation, he could be the closer, or at least he's going to be a very high leverage guy coming out of the pen. No matter what happens, Michael Kopech's either a starter or he's such a good bullpen piece that you would put him in that graphic over pretty much every other arm, that because everybody else has a question mark, or you don't have a picture of Eric Fetty in a White Sox uniform.
Right. Yeah, and I think that makes the most sense because I'm thinking about even Garrett Crochet. There's no guarantees that he makes the opening day roster because they may send him down. If they're serious about him being a starter, they may send him down to learn how to be a starter in the minors where the stakes are a lot lower than trying to do it at the major league level.
Right, but they're going to tell him in spring training, go for it, big guy. Win the job.
Well, of course they are.
Right.
And if he does win the job, if he's one of the best 5 starting pitchers that they have, they'll put up with him only going 4 or 5 innings, and having some shorter outings because it's going to be part of the process. And hopefully by the time August rolls around, Garrett Crochet has enough stamina and enough stretched out to be able to go, more 5 or 6 innings, which is what you need him to do. But I don't know that I could pick Eric Fetty out of a lineup if you just stacked 5 guys in Washington Nationals uniforms next to each other. Okay. I'm not even sure I know what Garrett Crochet looks like from memory, but I do know what Michael Kopech looks like because we've seen him front and center for so many years.
Right. It makes sense. You have to have a pitcher, right? And then the guy who's like the big face, the largest image on the graphic, dead center. It's like those Star Wars posters, right? Where, you have like the main characters that are going to be in that Star Wars.
Who's Vader? Who's Luke?
Right. He's the big guy. He's the main guy is Luis Robert Jr. He's the main guy, dead center.
And as he should be.
Right. And the only pitcher is Michael Kopech. Eloy Jimenez is in there swinging a bat because that's all Eloy Jimenez does.
Yes.
And you can't get rid of him because there was no market for him, so you have to have Eloy Jimenez in there. Andrew Benintendi's in there because he is the most expensive contract that you've ever handed out because your owner is cheap at 5 years and $75 million, and he's still got 4 more years left, so they know he's playing, so he's in there as well.
Andrew Benintendi's going to be there. Now, is this the pasta bulked up Andrew Benintendi? Is this meatball Benintendi, or is this still skinny Benintendi from last year?
No, it's I don't know. It's got to be a picture of him from last year.
Yeah.
He's doing something weird. He's smiling. He's got both hands in a fist motion. And like he's driving a car, but he's not actually driving a car. So I'm not exactly sure where they took the shot from, but he's there doing something. And then they have Andrew Vaughn receiving a throw over at first base. And those are the guys they're sure are going to be on the team. And I think that's very telling. I also find it very funny that a guy that you're paying $25 million to this year, and Yoan Moncada, is not the graphic. I love that.
Well, yeah. You know what they told him? They told him that he would provide the soundtrack to that picture. They just didn't tell him that there was going to be no sound.
Like here's the thing. Like that's telling to me, not because they're planning on moving Yoan Moncada. Nobody wants him at that money, right? But
they don't want to sell him around him.
Yeah, but everybody would just be annoyed seeing him in the picture. Everybody would be annoyed looking at an overpaid, underperforming guy in the picture. So they're not.
Well, he's the new Larry Garcia, isn't he? Right. Yes, he's the guy whose contract we complain about because he's not living up to it. And that will probably fall to Andrew Benintendi at some point in the near future. And but the other guys really that this team is now built around, the guys that are kind of forming Chris Getz' new core, you can't really put Nicky Lopez and Paul DeJong on a poster at this point. They're guys that are not even guaranteed to have their jobs, but they're guys that Getz is counting on to hold the fort until they find somebody better. Dominic Fletcher, we don't know. I don't know what Dominic Fletcher looks like. I'm sorry. So putting him on
again, there's no picture of him in a White Sox uniform, and none of the guys that they brought in are big enough names that you'd be like, we got so-and-so on our team, come out and buy tickets. Right?
Yeah, because you could do that if it's a bigger name, right? You could show them in the old uni, okay, and sit there and say, "Look, we got this guy," right? Like if they had, honestly, if they had traded for Juan Soto in the offseason,
he'd be on there.
He'd be on there in a Padres uniform if they had to put him on.
Right, he'd be on.
Or it'd be such an extreme close up of his face that all you get is like the visor of his batting helmet, or something like that.
They would find a way to work him in there. So here's the thing: I find that it's such a telling photo because, one, there is no addition to your team that's worth putting on there outside of, because they don't have a White Sox jersey on. So you don't have a big signing, right? And you've got guys that aren't in the graphic. And every single person in the graphic is somebody that you're sure is going to make the team in some regard. And you needed to have somebody throwing a baseball. Like if you had no pitchers in there, it would have looked weird. So you had to have a pitcher. And they're like, well, which pitcher are we going to use? Well, Kopech is the one guy we know is going to be playing somewhere. He's going to be somewhere.
Every one of those posters across the major leagues, even for minor league teams that are putting something like this out, there's one guy fielding a ball, right? There's one guy throwing a ball. There's one guy swinging a bat. And then there's somebody, one or two guys mugging or showing that they're fun.
Laughing. There's a guy laughing.
Yeah, Andrew Benintendi is he's in fun mode in that one, right? Luis Robert is he's in celebration, fun, serious Luis Robert Jr. mode, whatever mode that man's in these days.
But the reason I bring this up, as you're listening to Sox in the Basement, brought to you proudly by Cork and Carry at the Park, 33rd and Princeton, in the shadow of the ballpark, and one of two locations you can go into right now. And courtesy of Cork and Carry and Kona Beer, you can register for free, no purchase necessary, to get a trip to Hawaii. Drawings on March 15th. And while they're doing this, you can also get a Kona Beer, $5 on draft, and enjoy the award-winning burgers at 33rd and Princeton at Cork and Carry at the Park, your home for White Sox pregame, postgame, and in-game viewing. And then you can also register at the original location at 106th and Western, the original Cork and Carry. But the reason I bring this up is because that shows you how many guys are question marks. And I find this spring to be so intriguing to me because of the non-roster invitees. because of the guys that are coming up from the minor leagues getting a look that are on the 40-man, and because of the guys that, if you go to, say, Fangraphs and look at the depth chart, that are on the current depth chart that may not make the team. And there are so many storylines in this. Again, this is why Merk's gonna be on here in a few moments, because he's been covering this team for decades, and he's down there in spring training. And who else would I rather hear from at spring training than Scott Merkin, because he's got his finger right there on the pulse. But when I look at this, I see a roster that I have to look at this roster through the eyes of, this is what Chris Getz is able to do with an owner so cheap that he reduced payroll, and he had to go out and do something. Like, I blame the low payroll on the owner, an owner who, like, just, and I'm not falling for the thing that I fell for the last time this team went low payroll.
Oh, the money will be spent?
Yeah, because that's not happening, okay? Because when you saved $50 million a year or more by not spending it, you didn't all of a sudden increase your payroll to something absurd and go out and sign Bryce Harper or Manny Machado. You didn't do that. So the money really wasn't spent. You just brought it up to what it should have been, but you didn't, like, take that extra money you didn't spend in those previous years and do, like, a big splash signing. So the money really wasn't spent in my mind. That it was just a bunch of bull.
No, because if the money was going to be spent, like right now, there's an opportunity. Jordan Montgomery's sitting there playing chicken with a bunch of different teams.
Go sign Jordan Montgomery to a multi-year deal.
Go sign Jordan Montgomery and make sure that you got a person in your rotation for the next 4 years.
You're right with me on that one. Like, why not swoop in at this point and sign a Jordan Montgomery to a multi-year deal at the age that he's at right now? Because you're going to compete in 25 and 26, and if you really are going to do it, why not sweep in right now and do it? You've got all kinds of payroll, unless you really just don't believe in the guy. If you really believe that you're going to be able to pick from better pitchers next offseason, which they may believe. I mean, think about this. This is what Getz did, which I can't argue with. Knowing, and we've heard the comments already early on from down in Arizona, knowing his payroll is going to get cut, knowing there's only so much you could do in the first year, knowing that pitchers around the league looked at the White Sox as a team that plays such bad defense, it would be detrimental for them to sign as free agents there. He improved the defense. Eric Fetty had multiple suitors. And I know he's coming from the KBO, but we heard Scott White on this show talk about how different he is now. Well, a guy like that getting his second chance in MLB isn't coming to the White Sox if he thinks they have bad defense.
No, he had a 70% ground ball rate last year in the KBO. That's a guy that's pitching to contact who needs an infield. He needs a really good infield to succeed. The way frankly, the way that White Sox fans grimaced every time Aaron Bummer came in, and partially it's because you knew that he was going to give up a cheap ground ball that Anderson was either going to boot or not get to, and the black hole of second base was never going to field. And, the defense improving helps a guy like Eric Fetty sit there and go, I am for real. Why do you think he only signed a 2-year deal at a relatively decent
because he wants to see the White Sox prove that they can play defense. He doesn't want to be locked in for too long. And he wants to show up in Major League Baseball and show people he's the real deal. And you can't do that with a bad defense. So he's an example of a player that you probably don't get if you don't improve the defense. The White Sox have an issue, I think, in Major League Baseball where they have a bad reputation amongst players. I don't know if every free agent wants to come to Chicago when the reputation is that the owner isn't really trying to win, would prefer to be in second place. We've heard those comments before. David Sampson's been on this show and talked about what he said that Jerry Reinsdorf said.
How that he actually had that conversation.
Right, we've had that conversation with him on this program. Okay, whether or not it's real or not, perception is this team doesn't go all the way in terms of pushing all their chips in, and they don't play very good defense. So why would I go there and pitch and hurt my numbers so that when I come out and I'm a free agent again, I've won nothing and I don't make as much money? So Chris Getz has to fix what he can control, right? He can't make the old man spend money, but he can change the perception of what the organization's like and how they do their business. Split Rock Coffee is one of the many small businesses that Sox in the Basement is supporting currently. Online at soxinthebasement.com. You can check the link inside of the show notes or go to soxinthebasement.com, click on store and see all the small businesses, including Split Rock, founded and run by 2 disabled veterans to the benefit of other veterans. Check out the offerings from Split Rock and all of the other small businesses currently in our Vouch store at soxinthebasement.com. Joining me on the phone line right now to kick off spring training on Sox in the Basement, Scott Merkin of MLB.com. How are you, Merk?
Good. I'm trying to figure out my TV, and it's in the hotel room here, and it's kind of screwing up. All right, I think we got it now. I'm glad everyone could be a part of that with me.
I love it.
Where I stay, they used to have DirecTV, so during spring training, we'd have like 300, 400 channels. It was insane. You'd have Big Ten Network. You'd have channels I never even saw before, like Axis and that kind of thing. And now they've gone to a more sedate setup, and there's like 20 channels. So who has time to watch, sports anyways, aside from maybe a Cactus League game when I'm off, or maybe an NCAA tournament, of course, in March. Everyone watches that. Even the players watch that. But
speaking of NCAA, I know your team, since the last time we talked to you, Michigan wins the national championship in football. I saw you out there gathering interviews on Tuesday at spring training wearing your hoodie. Do you have something that says national champions on it for every day of the week while you're down there?
Not every day, but I think just to set the tone tomorrow, I'll probably break out the championship shirt to start for day one, and then we'll maybe mix it in after a while, after here and there. I ordered a bunch of stuff before I left, and in order to get it on time, I paid the extra whatever it is, $18 to get it shipped overnight. So I guess if I still want something now, I'm staying at this hotel for 44 days now, because 2 days are off, so 44 days left. So I got plenty of time to ship it here if I want more stuff.
So let's talk about, I think I want to jump right into the big question here. And
you don't want to just keep going on with Michigan football?
No, I don't. God, I'm really not that interested in it. The White Sox, some have categorized what they're doing as a rebuild. I don't know if I like calling it that, because you don't go out and get some of the veteran players that you picked up and have them slated for starting roles if you're doing a traditional tear it down for 4 years rebuild. This seems like a very quick process. How do you categorize what Chris Getz is doing right now?
That's what I put in my newsletter today when we were asked for 3 storylines to watch. And one is, I do think it's a rebuild, but I don't think it's a rebuild that Rick Hahn and Kenny Williams executed, which, did well up until the finishing point, unfortunately. Where, you tear it down and you trade everyone away. And there still may be, if this team is not good during the season, which a lot of projections, Pacoda has them, 65.5 wins. If they're not good, then you may see some more veterans traded, someone like, for sure, Dylan Cease, because there'll be huge interest in a player of his talent and character, and, still a year and a half of contractual control. But, I think it's a rebuild, but it's also kind of a reclassification, a redevelopment, in that they're trying to build kind of a team. It's almost like they're trying to build a team handbook, they want a White Sox way. They don't feel there's been a White Sox way. So, Chris went out this year in this part and focused on defense. He focused on, I think, getting a more cohesive clubhouse. He focused on bringing in guys who've won before, like Martin Maldonado, who's going to be a great addition for that team. He focused on wanting the team to play a little quicker, So I think if they don't win this year, which again are the projections right now, that they don't look like a frontier team, they're going to be top tier team. Frontier sounds like they're in the Wild West, right? Top tier team. They're going to be at least entertaining to watch. And I think the thing with this though is any plan like this, where you start to build it up, you develop some depth, and let's give credit where credit's due. Some of this depth was brought about when Rick made trades at the deadline last year. But when you're building it up, you're going to have to spend at the end, and you're going to have to spend wisely at the end. And some of the expenditures the Sox made, while looking good and taking a good shot on paper, just did not pan out and resulted at the end of the last rebuild in 2 total playoff wins and, 2 really rough seasons. One where they were just the definition of mediocre in 2022, where they never got below 5 under, they never got above 5 over, and last year where they were just awful. Last year where, by the end of April, barring a miracle, they were pretty much out of any kind of contention. So, you're gonna have to rely on a lot of guys developing, a lot of guys hitting, and some of the guys you have that you're going to keep continuing to build up, and then adding on key people to finish things off, which, they did add, but I'm not sure if they added that one final piece they needed to finish that, the last rebuild.
So there's about 14 starting pitchers, maybe 15, depending on which quotes you follow over the last couple of months.
It's going to be interesting how they build all these guys up. They're going to have a B game every day of the week, I think, if they're going to stretch all these guys out.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
We shall see.
and you look at Pedro's comments, you look at Chris Getz's comments, and you're like, okay, they've got a lot of starting pitchers. Today, Pedro Gaffol mentioned 14 starting pitchers on the board competing, but only mentions Cease, Fede, and Soroka specifically. And our Twitter or X account or whatever you want to call it these days put out immediately, those are the three names that feel like they're assured in the 5-man rotation. We've been saying that for the last couple of months. And then everybody else is really in a competition. So that's 11 pitchers fighting for 2 spots. Michael Kopech and probably Chris Flexen have the inside track, but nothing's assured, I would think. What do you think?
Let's put it this way. There's certain things you expect to hear every camp from GMs and managers. And, I think both Pedro and Chris have been unfailingly honest, but I think there's also things you say. They do not, very few teams, and even if you're rebuilding or reconfiguring or retooling or redeveloping, whatever you want to call it, very few teams go into camp without having things set up, so they have an idea who these guys are going to be. And I would think, Cease, Soroka, and Fede are set. They're part of the 5. I think Kopech and Flexen are the final 2. We had asked Chris in an earlier Zoom about Flexen, and he said he expected him to be his 5th starter. So, that could change. I understand that could change. And, things do change. But, one of the things you want to do is you can never – now, again, a lot of these guys who are in competition have track records where you can base it on too. But you certainly don't want to base things on, oh, my goodness, this guy had a, 0.25 ERA in spring training because, as I've said many times before, no one ever got to the Hall of Fame because they were outstanding in spring training. You got to be better besides spring training. So I think it's, the competition is something they've sold since the end of last season. And I'm not saying it's a gimmick. There is competition, but when you think about it, there really aren't that many spots unless they really change everything to decide. Moncada is playing 3rd. DeYoung is playing short. Lopez, as of right now, is playing 2nd. Andrew Vaughn is at 1st. Maldonado and Stacey are your catches. Benintendi's in left. Luis Roberts in center. Eloy Jimenez is your DH. So where of those I just listed are guys where there's doubt in a position? You're not going to go to Luis Robert and tell him, man, 180 in spring training, maybe try a little bit in Charlotte before we get you back up here to start May or something like that. That ain't happening. So right field is still open. They added Fletcher, Kevin Pillar, Gavin Sheets, Oscar Colas doesn't get much mention, but he's still in the picture. And there's some bench spots that are open, but this is not like this is not, Major League 4 or 5 or whatever they ended up with on Major League movie wise. There are guys said, and I would expect that Kopech and Flexen are the final 2 in the rotation. Now, on the other hand, Kopech has proven his versatility. Kopech can work out of the bullpen. So he's one guy that I think you can stretch out and then possibly move into a bullpen role if you really feel that works better. And, I think it would be good to give him some guidance, even though Pedro said today, he understands, they're stretching him out. He thinks of him as a starter, but, we'll see what happens. I mean, you could even think of, I guess, Kopech or even possibly Crochet as a closer because there is no closer on this team right now with, Liam Hendricks gone and Gregory Santos traded to Seattle. So again, I'm not saying it was just talk. I do believe there's going to be competition, and that's a good thing. They're going to push each other 100%. So let's not throw away the competition line, but I don't know how many roster spots are actually open. I think the bullpen, there's some more open spots, but aside from that, I'm not sure how many are open. I mean, I don't know if you disagree with me. Of the position players I've listed, do you see anyone who would have a tough time, even if they struggle in the spring, making the team?
Well, DeYoung feels like he's a placeholder until Montgomery gets here, and I don't expect Montgomery to be ready to go. And Nicky Lopez, I mean, look, he's the guy, he's the plan. I've always been, I've waxed poetic about the idea that Danny Mendick and his 3 buttons that are unbuttoned on his shirt could come out there and have, an amazing spring and remind Chris Getz of that small sample size we got a couple years ago and make his way onto the team as a non-roster invitee. But I don't think he takes Lopez's job at 2nd.
No, and if one of Chris's big goals this offseason, understandably so, because as he explained to us yesterday very carefully very eloquently that some of the pitchers he talked to at the beginning of this offseason and their agents did not want to pitch, weren't interested in the Sox because of the rough defense. So that was a big goal for him. So if you're talking about how, DeYoung and Lopez, I don't, not too far removed, was a Gold Glove finalist, I believe. I mean, if you're talking about these guys out there, you're not suddenly going to supplant them the last week of spring training, unless you make some sort of move, obviously, where you feel you, as Chris has said many times, you got better as a team. So yeah, I think there's some fluidity up the middle. Yes, Colson Montgomery is going to be there this year, barring injury or barring something stunning. I could see him there in, May. I think he's that far along and he's that good a player. I don't think he breaks with the team, but I think he's pretty darn close. You have a guy like Brian Ramos, who's a third baseman who could be a guy in consideration at some point, not too distant future. But yeah, I mean, I think as we're sitting right now, I'm looking just as, March 28th for the Tigers opening day there in Guaranteed Rate Field. I don't think there's anyone who's going to get knocked out of their spots there that I listed. So again, competition, take it as you will. It doesn't have to be competition for, you're going to knock someone out of a spot, but it's competition as in push each other, really work hard. And even if you don't get the spot, make your name known and go out there and fight. So
Scott Merkin and every guest here on Sox in the Basement brought to you by the Village of Lamont. Want to experience a downtown with real history, great eats and drinks, and green spaces filled with adventure? Visit the Village of Lamont. Shop, dine, drink, explore, and see everything they have going on this weekend and beyond at lamontdowntown.com. Garrett Crochet was standing next to you on Tuesday giving some comments to a little bit of a media scrum. And it was interesting.
We were pretty much the same height, as you can tell from that video, I think.
I saw that. It was interesting because earlier in the week, Chris Getz mentions, he's trying to be a starter, and yeah, of course he's going to have an opportunity, and he's giving opportunity, or he's at least saying the right thing about these 14 pitchers that are all vying for a spot. But Crochet's comments sounded like he understood that he has to really perform well, and there's nothing really assured, and let's just take that as a day at a time. What are your thoughts on him, his path? Does he possibly start in AAA, stretching out if he really wants to be a starter, or is it basically not a starter, he's probably going to be in the bullpen then?
The Sox have pretty much said all things at this point. We had talked to Chris earlier in this offseason. I don't remember the exact time, but I had asked him about, could the stretching out happen at Charlotte or Birmingham? And he said, which, I guess ultimately it doesn't matter if he goes to, if that's the goal, it doesn't matter if he's pitching in Charlotte's rotation or Birmingham's rotation, right? Wherever is kind of needed. And he said that's possible. But then yesterday he said that he expects him to be part of the bullpen. And certainly, talent wise and just ability, he is a lock for the bullpen. If they're going to build him up that way, if they're going to use him as, maybe possibly a modified 6-man rotation where he, starts and goes 3 or 4 innings and it builds it up, and maybe by the second half or even into next year, or maybe it doesn't take that long. Who knows? I mean, one key thing he said today with, the injuries he's dealt with, specifically with Tommy John, is that, his recovery, he's got to be honest about the recovery. And that's what's going to tell where they go. If he throws, a 2-up and doesn't feel great, he's got to let them know that, hey, it didn't respond like I wanted, and they can adjust from there. So I think they're all saying the right things on that. And to his credit, he stood up in the Sox clubhouse at the end of last year and told us that that's what he wanted to do. He felt like he could do it, and he said that again today. And he would feel bad if he went through his career and never, kind of fought for a chance. He fought for it, and Getz agreed with him, and so did obviously Brian Bannister and Ethan Katz, and now we'll see where he goes from there. It's interesting because I broke it down in the story today. You look at his baseball savant. He was a big fastball guy, worked the slider, and not much of the changeup. Some in there, but you don't have to, right, as a reliever. So he did work on that. He said in the offseason, he said he worked on some stuff in his repertoire, which he smiled and said, I'm going to keep it in-house, and we'll let you guys see if you recognize it or see what you think, if it's effective when I get out there and pitch. Like our opinion is going to really matter in the Sox scheme of things, right? But so he has made some changes, I think, to adjust to that. He's fixed some mechanics things he talked about today. So we'll see. We'll see how this plays out. He's a super talented dude, and I don't believe the fact that, because you drafted him where you did, he has to be a starter. He can't be a reliever. I think you need, where you drafted him where you did, which is 11th overall in 2020 draft. You need someone to contribute. That's all. Who's someone who's, now if he's a starter, even better, right? But if he contributes as a closer or, an Andrew Miller type, like, who was so important to that 2016 Cleveland team, then all the better. Just make sure that Garrett is a key piece in that rotation, and that would make him valuable at any spot in the draft.
I'm curious if you've asked, or if you plan on asking, whether or not the White Sox are done. Like, I bought into everything that they've they've done this year in terms of adding their defense and shoring that up and ensuring a White Sox way. And Chris Getz has changed a lot about the guys who are evaluating players, scouting players, working with pitchers, all this stuff, right? But I look at that list of all of the free agent pitching that's out there, and I see so much of it out there, and I know there's 14 names. But, I mean, it just feels like they could go and snag somebody at a reasonable deal who just hasn't been able to find a chair yet, and the music's about to stop before the season starts. Do you think they're absolutely done, or is there the possibility he could still add in the next week or so?
Maybe the White Sox will have the first ever all-starter pitching staff. 13 guys, all 13 are starters, and just use them in different forms one way or the other. could be a revolutionary move. Brian Bannister is been characterized by so many as just such a great pitching mind, and same with Ethan Katz for that matter too. Two guys who really Wise in the bullpen too. But I mean, I'm more familiar with Ethan Katz than Brian Bannister, but maybe he's going to change things that much. I really kind of thought they were close to done before they made those moves on a Saturday afternoon, evening to get with Arizona to get Fletcher and then to get the Loach, and I believe his name is Baroa, right? Baroa from the right-hander from Texas. Yeah. Anything's possible. And Chris said he's open to, making the team better, which is what Rick said and what Kenny said before him. That's the GM credo pretty much, right? So you do what you can, but it would be very surprising if they made some sort of big move or even some sort of mid-level move to add. And I think they like what they have. And, they added 2 more non-roster guys today. They added Corey Knebel and Dominic Leone. So we'll see how they factor in, and they have a pretty good group of non-rosters along with some of the minor leaguers they've added to spring training. So we'll see how that works. But as long as there's options out there, you never know. You never know what can happen. Something may fit into what they want and may make them better than what they feel they have now, and they may go for it. So like you said, there's so many names out there. There's so many guys there. You can't say it's not going to happen. I remember it was, I guess, spring training of 16. It would be right when they added Jimmy Rollins. I want to say end of February, beginning of March, to play shortstop until Tim Anderson, is ready. And so things can change, things can happen. We'll see what it is. But I would say as of right now, they're you never say done, but they're settled and they're happy with what they have right now.
One more here with Scott Merkin from MLB.com. Make sure you read his newsletter's great. He's covering the team constantly. He's several decades into doing it, right? What's the exact amount of years, Merk?
Let's see. I go by manager. So 8 Ozzie, 5 Robin, that's 13. 4 Ricky, 17. 2 Tony and Cairo combined, 19. 2 Pedro, and 1 Jerry Manuel. So 22. This is my 22nd season.
Holy cow. All right. So here's the guy.
No kidding.
Here's the guy I'm interested in because I'm not sure if there's a spot for him based upon what the GM keeps saying he's emphasizing. Chris Getz is talking about defense. He went out and added a couple of guys that have a legit shot of playing right field. I never look at Gavin Sheets as a defensive outfielder. In fact, it was never his natural position. Is he on the bubble? I mean, I haven't heard anybody say he's at risk of not making the team, but there's so many different guys, so much versatility, so much defense that seems to be added. Fletcher supposedly is a heck of a defensive player. Is Gavin Sheets in trouble this spring?
No, I think he's in competition like everything else. And I think there is a spot that is open for the team, right? I mean, you have the backup catcher, which is Stassi. You have a utility infielder, or not utility. You have a all-around infielder, and I'm missing one other guy in that spot there. But and then another outfielder who I'm guessing is going to be Pilar. I think Pilar will make it, as a non-roster invite, and I think Fletcher is, pretty much a lock for the team. So I think you look at a guy like Sheets who can play first. He has worked his tail off to be, to be able to understand and play the outfield, right field, and very little bit of left field. He's a good left-handed power bat off the bench. Is that what they want from him? Is that what they feel they can get best out of him, where he's pinch hitting and maybe starting once a week or something like that? Or do you look at a guy like Deloach who you got from Seattle, who probably gives you a better a more natural defensive fit in the outfield and also has some left-handed pop? So, there are some options there, but I think Gavin's right in the picture. I think Gavin is highly thought of by the organization. So, and he is, a left-handed home run guy. So that's always valuable to have either in your lineup or off your bench. So I think, in that sense, I agree with Pedro that there's no one, because they've been here a few years and you're known, that's guaranteed a spot that could be up for grabs. In the same sense, I don't think Brian Ramos is going to hit 480 in spring and they're going to take him over Yohan Moncada at third base. You know what I'm saying? So I think there are some spots where the competition is going to be more decisive in terms of roster breaks, and there are others where it's just going to be good to see competition and good to see guys pushing. So going back to answer your question, yeah, I think, he's firmly in the mix. I don't think he's a lock to be on the roster, but I think he's firmly in the mix.
All right, Scott Merkin, check him out on the Twitter. Get on the newsletter. Read all of his articles just by going to the White Sox website because he works for MLB.com, and he does an excellent job covering the team, and he's always gracious enough to jump on Sox in the Basement to check in with us. Have a great spring, and wear as much national championship attire as your heart desires, Merk.
As they say, banners hang forever. You can't take away those titles. So
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.